John Harrington sat behind the wheel of his sleek black SUV, staring at the quiet street in front of the cafe. I had driven past this spot many times, but today felt different. In the passenger seat, his 10-year-old son Michael shifted in. His car seat, his small fingers tracing patterns on the leather strap of his seatbelt. Michael did not speak much, and when he did, his voice trembled with worry. John knew that each new place could feel like a storm in Michael's mind. He had read the articles, talked to doctors, even hired a tutor to help his son adjust. Nothing worked as well as love and patience. The cafe looked warm and inviting from outside. Big glass windows let in soft morning light. Wooden tables were arranged neatly, with vases of fresh flowers on each one. A gentle hum of music floated into the street. John hoped this calm scene would soothe Michael's nerves. He parked the car and took a deep breath. He opened the door and lifted Michael carefully out of his car seat. Michael's small feet touched the pavement, and he looked up at the building with wide, curious eyes. John moved slowly, giving his son time to adjust. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, fresh bread, and sweet pastries. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and plants hung from the ceiling in woven baskets. A few patrons sat at tables by the window, sipping lattes and working on laptops. No one seemed to notice John and Michael at first. John guided Michael toward a corner table. Michael's eyes darted around as he walked, taking in the shapes of chairs, the glint of a chandelier, the gentle rise and fall of other people's voices. John chose the corner so Michael could have some space. Away from the busy path between the counter and the door, John settled Michael into a high chair. At the table, he reached over to smooth Michael's hair and offered him a soft smile. "You ready, buddy?" he asked quietly. Michael nodded, his lips pressed together in concentration. John felt a pang in his chest. He thought back to the day they had learned about the autism diagnosis, the doctor's soft voice, the medical terms that made John's head spin. At first, John had blamed himself. Spent years building a company, chasing deals, and when Michael came along, he wanted to give his son the best life, but he could never buy what Michael needed most: a gentle guide through a world that felt too loud. A waitress approached, clipboard in hand, her steps sure and calm. She wore a crisp white blouse and black slacks, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. John smiled politely as she stopped by their table. "Good morning," she said in a warm voice. What can I get for you today?" John glanced at Michael, then back at the waitress. Michael's lips parted as if to answer, but no sound came out. That was Michael's way sometimes. He wanted to speak, but the words got stuck. "2 hot chocolates, please," John said, clearing his throat. He used a soft tone, hoping the sound would not startle Michael. The waitress nodded, her eyes gentle. "Of course." "And would you like any food with that?" John ordered 2 plain croissants, knowing Michael loved simple tastes. The waitress scribbled on her pad and offered Michael a small, friendly smile. Michael stared at her for a long moment, his gaze steady. Then he looked away, focusing on a patterned tile on the floor. John watched Michael's nervous energy flare as he traced shapes in his mind. The boy's small hands fidgeted on the table edge. John felt a tight knot in his chest. He knew that every new sign, every small movement, could hide a storm or a spark of joy. He had seen Michael lose control before, shaking or crying, when the world felt too big. He had also seen his son melt into quiet wonder when something sweet or beautiful reached him. That was why he had brought Michael here. He wanted to find that spark. As they waited, John picked at his croissant, his mind racing with work emails and financial charts. He checked his phone, then put it away, reminded himself to be present. Michael sat quietly now, rocking slightly in his chair, his eyes trailing upward toward a speaker in the corner. Soft violin music filled the room, its gentle notes weaving around the tables. Michael's lips curved into the faintest smile. John felt hope rise in his chest. The door to the cafe opened, and a woman walked in carrying a violin case. She wore a crisp black jacket over a white blouse, and her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. John saw her greet the barista with a quick nod. The barista looked nervous, but handed her a small cup of coffee. The woman thanked him and turned away. John felt a strange pull of curiosity. He looked back at Michael, whose eyes were fixed on the violin case. The boy's chest rose and fell with excitement he could not hide. John turned back to his phone, but his thoughts left the work email behind. He sensed something was about to happen. The waitress who had taken their order returned with 2 steaming mugs. She set them down gently, careful not to jostle Michael. "Here you go," she said softly. 2 hot chocolates. I added a little whipped cream just for fun." Michael's eyes widened at the sight of the white swirl on top of the dark drink. He reached out and touched the edge of the mug. The whipped cream quivered under his finger. He pulled his hand back quickly, then smiled. John felt a warmth spread through him. He lifted his mug, blew on the surface, and took a small sip. The sweetness and rich chocolate filled his mouth. He watched Michael bring the mug close to his lips and sipped carefully. Michael's eyes closed in delight. John pushed a few crumbs off the table and cleared his throat. "This place is good, right?" he said in a low voice. Michael nodded, his smile growing. The pianist at the corner table packed up her sheet music and left through a side door. For a moment, the cafe fell, silent except for the hum of conversation. Then, to John's surprise, the woman with the violin case approached their table. She set the case down beside Michael's chair and smiled at them both. John blinked and looked at Michael, who stared at the violin with wide, curious eyes. "Hello," the woman said quietly. "I'm Tara." I couldn't help but notice Michael. "Seems to like the music here." She rested a hand gently on the violin case. Would he like to see this up close? John's heart thumped in his chest. The woman's voice was calm and friendly.
"Hi."
Michael leaned forward, his eyes bright. John felt a rush of gratitude toward this stranger who cared enough to share her music with his son. He opened his mouth to say yes, but the words caught in his throat. He nodded instead. Tara lifted the violin case and opened it carefully, revealing the polished wood instrument inside. The bow sat neatly beside it. Michael watched every move with rapt attention, his fidgeting fingers stilled. John swallowed hard as Tara lifted the violin and held it in front of Michael, her eyes kind and patient. Michael's small fingers traced the smooth wood, and John knew at that moment the world was shifting for his son. Something gentle and powerful was moving in the quiet cafe, and John Harrington would never forget this morning. Tara slipped away from John and Michael's table with a quiet grace. John watched her move through the tables, her black slacks brushing the floor, and disappear behind the counter. He shifted in his chair, trying to keep Michael calm. Michael held his hot chocolate close, his small body swaying slightly. The cafe's hum felt gentle now, but John's mind raced. He worried, what if Michael got upset? What if the music felt too loud? He reminded himself to breathe, in and out, slowly. Tara reappeared in the doorway, carrying something wrapped in a soft cloth. John's eyes widened when he saw the shape. It was long, narrow, and heavy. His heart skipped a beat as she walked toward them with purpose. She moved past other diners, some reading newspapers, others tapping on laptops, and knelt by Michael's chair. Michael blinked in surprise, clutching his mug of hot chocolate. John held his breath. He did not want to startle his son. He gave Tara a small nod. She smiled gently, then unwrapped the cloth. It revealed a small violin polished to a soft shine. The wood glowed in the cafe's light. The bow lay beside it, its horsehair taut and smooth. Michael's eyes shone. He leaned forward, his fingers itching to reach out. Tara's voice came softly, almost a whisper. "This is mine," she said. "I play at a local music school. Thought Michael might like to hear some real notes." She lifted the violin and stood. John felt his chest tighten. He had never seen Michael so still. Michael's breath slowed. As he watched Tara raise the instrument, Tara turned toward a quiet corner of the cafe, away from the main aisle. She set her feet just so, standing tall but relaxed. Then she lifted the violin to her shoulder and placed her chin gently on the chin rest. The tip of the bow hovered above the strings like a bird about to take flight. John felt goosebumps rise on his arms. He had heard violin music before, but never like this, never so close. In a moment that felt like a breath held, Tara drew the bow across the strings. The first note was soft, like a drop of water falling on a calm pond. It rippled through the air. Michael's mouth opened in wonder. The note turned into another, and then another, each one smooth and sweet. The melody was simple, but it carried a gentle power. The tune was familiar, a lullaby that many children learned, a song about stars and wishes. Tara's fingers moved with quiet confidence, pressing the strings just so. The notes rose and fell. Weaving around the tables, diners paused mid-sip mid-word. The barista behind the counter set down a latte and listened. A couple by the window put away their phones. Even the hum of the espresso machine seemed to soften. Michael slid out of his high chair and stood on the floor, his small feet bare against the cool tiles. John reached out and wrapped an arm around Michael's waist, steadying him. Michael held the violin case open on the table, his eyes glued to Tara's hands. Each movement of her bow made his lips part in a silent gasp. His body, usually restless, was still as a statue. John felt tears in his eyes. He watched his son's wonder and felt something he had not felt in a long time, a sense of hope that stretched beyond the walls of the cafe. He glanced at the other patrons. They watched too, some with smiles, some with their heads tilted as if trying to catch every note. None of them knew Michael's story or John's fears, but for a moment, they shared his joy. Tara closed her eyes as she played, letting the music flow through her. Her fingers moved fast when the melody rose, slow when it sank. The tune built gently, then returned to its soft beginning. The final note hung in the air like a breath, and then, as if on cue, the cafe erupted in soft applause. A few people clapped, whispered beautiful or amazing under their breath. Michael's face shone. He took a step toward Tara, his small hand lifting in a question. John squeezed his shoulder. He felt his son's excitement ripple through him. Tara set the violin down on the table beside her and smiled at Michael. She patted the spot next to her, inviting him to come closer. Michael obeyed, sliding carefully across the floor. John watched Tara's kindness as she knelt beside Michael. She lifted the violin and held it so Michael could see the strings. Her voice was calm and steady. "Would you like to try?" Michael reached out with his small fingers. He touched the strings gently, barely pressing. The moment his finger brushed the wood, his eyes widened. Tara guided his hand, placing his fingers on the right spots. Then she took his other hand. Guiding the bow across the strings, Michael drew the bow, and a scratchy note emerged. It made him start, but then he smiled. That sound, his own sound, filled him with delight. The note was rough, but it was his. Tara nodded and clapped softly. The other diners smiled too, offering quiet praise. Michael's hand shook a little with excitement. He tried again. This time the note was clearer. He giggled, a high, pure sound. John felt tears fall down his cheeks. He gently wiped them away and watched Michael beam with pride. He had never heard his son laugh like that. The world felt to him like it had opened a new door. He had spent so long trying to find ways to reach Michael's heart. Until now, nothing had worked like music. Tara encouraged Michael to try another note and then another. Each time the note rang out a little stronger. Michael's joy grew. His body regained a bit of calm, not the rigid stillness of fear, but the relaxed wonder of a child discovering something new. John held his heart in his hands, afraid to let this moment slip away. After a few more tries, Tara handed Michael the violin and stood back. "Play as you like," she said softly. Michael's fingers trembled, but he positioned them carefully. He pulled the bow and produced a clear, true note. Then another, then a third, tiny melody. Tara's eyes filled with warmth as she watched him. The cafe hummed with gentle applause again. John whispered to Michael, "You're amazing, buddy." Michael looked at his father, then back at the violin. He smiled in that soft, honest way he reserved for the moments he felt safe and happy. John felt a surge of love so big it made his chest ache. He realized something important his son had. A gift, a spark that needed this gentle light to glow. The barista came over, eyes bright. "That was incredible," she said to Tara. "You have a real gift, and Michael is so lucky." The music teacher by the window stood and offered her card. "I teach violin lessons across town," the teacher said. "With your son?" John blinked, astonished. He accepted the card with trembling fingers. Michael handed the violin back to Tara, his eyes full of thanks. He went back to his chair, clutching his hot chocolate now cold, but he did not mind. The excitement in his heart kept him warm. John looked at Tara and bowed his head in gratitude. Tara smiled and patted Michael on the shoulder. Then she stood, took the violin case, and walked back toward the counter. John reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card, and held it out to Tara. She stopped and turned. John's voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said simply. "Everything." Tara accepted the card. "Keep it," she said. "Use it to set up those lessons." Then she disappeared behind the counter. John watched Michael sip his hot chocolate, his mind alive with plans and hopes. The cafe had returned to its usual buzz, people chatting, cups clinking, but to John, everything felt different now. Saw his son's bright eyes and heard the echo of those violin notes in his heart. He knew this morning would change their lives forever. Tara settled into the chair beside Michael, her violin resting lightly on her shoulder. She smiled at him and spoke in her soft, steady voice. "Come on, Michael, you can try." She lifted his small hand and guided his fingers to the right spots on the strings. John leaned forward, his heart pounding. He watched every movement, afraid to blink. Michael's fingers brushed the strings, and for a moment he froze. His breath caught in his throat. Thankful for Tara's calm, he followed her gentle guidance. Tara placed Michael's other hand on the bow, holding it loosely between his thumb and fingers. She adjusted his grip until his hand felt steady. Michael's lips trembled as he looked at the bow and the strings. He swallowed, then nodded. John swallowed too. He crouched down so he could see Michael's face. The boy's brow was furrowed with concentration. He drew his breath in slowly. Tara counted softly under her breath. 1, 2, 3. Then she let him lead. Michael drew the bow across the strings. The sound was scratchy at first, came out rough and quivery, like a bird trying to sing for the first time. Michael jolted at the noise, pulling the bow back quickly. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The cafe held its breath. Then Michael's chest rose and fell. A small smile crept onto his face. He looked up at Tara, his eyes bright with surprise. Tara nodded and said, "You did it." Her warm praise washed over him. John felt tears sting his eyes. He swallowed hard so his voice would not shake when he spoke. Michael watched Tara with wonder. He set the bow down and ran his fingers along the violin's neck. Tara lifted his hand and placed it back on the bow. "Let's try again," she said, her voice like a soft song. Michael took a deep breath. He steadied his hands as best he could. Then he pulled the bow across the strings once more. This time, the note rang clearer. It wobbled, but it was real. The cafe filled with the scratchy tone that slowly straightened into a gentle hum. A ripple of applause rose around them. Patrons who had watched in silence gave little claps and whispered, "Good job." Michael's smile widened. He giggled, that sweet, clear laugh that John loved more than anything. Michael tried the note again and again, each one more confident. Then the last. The roughness smoothed a bit, and for a moment the note rang true. "At!" John rose to his feet, his legs unsteady. He clapped and cheered for Michael, louder than anyone else. Michael turned and saw his father. He beamed and gave a shy thumbs up. John's eyes filled with tears. He held his hand to his heart, feeling a surge of pride and love. He reached out to hug Michael gently, careful not to jostle the violin. Tara guided Michael through a simple tune she knew he could master, "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." She hummed the melody first, nodding for Michael to follow. Dod. Michael watched. Her bow moved back and forth, following the pattern of the song. He placed his fingers where she pointed. His small hands were still trembling, but he tried. With Tara's soft count in his ear, 1, 2, 3, 4, he drew the bow across the strings. The notes tumbled out in a sweet, hesitant melody. Some notes were flat, some were sharp, and some wavered. but it was music. His music. Each time Michael managed a clear note, Tara and John clapped. The other diners joined in. Even the barista paused mid-order to watch. A hush fell over the room when Michael played the little tune almost flawlessly. For a moment, the cafe felt like a concert hall. At the last note, everyone cheered. A few people stood and clapped, and someone called out, "Bravo!" Michael's face flushed with happiness. He turned to look at John. John lifted him gently out of his chair and set him on his lap. Michael's little arms wrapped around his father's neck. John buried his face in Michael's hair and whispered, "You're amazing, buddy." Buddy gathered her violin and handed it to Michael. "Keep trying," she said. "Practice makes perfect." Michael held the instrument carefully, cradling it like a treasure. His small fingers tapped the wood as if he were already memorizing its shape. John watched the scene in awe. He had never seen Michael so alive, so connected. As Michael explored the violin, a woman rose from a table nearby. She carried a violin teacher's card in her hand. She approached quietly. "Excuse me," she said to John, holding out the card. "I teach violin lessons at the Harmony Music Academy. I saw Michael playing. He has real talent. I'd love to offer him free lessons until he is ready for a full scholarship." John accepted the card with a shaky hand. He looked up at Tara, then back at the teacher. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. "This means so much." The teacher smiled kindly. "He's a quick learner.
With a little practice, he'll amaze us all."
Then she returned to her table as quietly as she had come. Michael looked at the card curiously. John folded it and tucked it into his pocket. Michael's happiness glowed in his eyes. He held the violin in his lap, tracing the strings with his fingers. Tara knelt beside them and brushed back a strand of hair from Michael's forehead. "You have a gift," she said softly. "Never let it go." John placed his hand on Tara's shoulder. "Thank you," he said, "from the bottom of our hearts." Tara smiled and stood. She gathered her violin case and violin. Michael reached out and touched her hand. Tara patted his palm affectionately. Then she turned and walked away toward the counter. Michael watched her go, his little body shivered with excitement. He looked up at John and asked, his voice a clear, bright sound, "More?" John hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, buddy, more." John stood and led Michael by the hand. He walked up to the counter where Tara was cleaning glasses. He handed her John's business card. "I want to help reward you for what you did," he said. Tara's eyes widened. "You don't have to," she said softly. John smiled warmly. "You gave my son his first step into music. It's worth more than any tip." He tapped his wallet and handed her an envelope. "Please use this for your own lessons, whatever you need." Tara looked touched. She accepted the envelope and tucked it into her apron pocket. "Thank you," she whispered. John led Michael back to their table. Michael sat, still cradling the violin. John placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did great today," he told him. Michael nodded, his eyes shining, fingered the bow and strings, clearly already imagining the next time he would play. And John looked around the cafe, at the smiling faces, at the teacher's card on the table, at the violin in his son's hands. In that moment, John realized something deeply true. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from the simplest acts of kindness. Tara had seen his son's spark and had nurtured it. The other patrons had stopped their busy lives to cheer for a boy they had never met. A teacher had offered her expertise freely, and Michael had found something inside himself that had been waiting to shine. John took Michael into his arms and whispered, "Let's come back soon." Michael rested his head on John's shoulder and whispered back, "Yes." John felt his own heart soften and expand. He knew that this moment would stay with them forever. The moment when a simple act of sharing a violin in a cozy cafe opened a new world for his son and for himself. Tara smiled at Michael as she set the violin on her shoulder again. John sat up straighter, his heart thumping. Michael's small hands trembled with excitement. The cafe felt different now, warmer, brighter, full of promise. The soft morning light framed Tara's curved bow as she began to play the opening notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Her bow moved slow and steady, teaching Michael the pattern of the song. Each note sang gently, like a kind voice calling out to a shy child. Michael watched closely. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on Tara's fingers. Over to steady him, placing a gentle hand on Michael's back. Michael's breathing was calm now, not jagged with fear, but steady with focus. He took a small breath and matched the pace of Tara's bow. Then she took his small hand and placed it on the strings just below the bridge. Michael's fingers pressed lightly against the wood. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if he were listening deep inside himself. When Tara raised the bow again, she guided Michael's free hand to hold it. His fingers curved around the stick, and he felt the taut horsehair against his skin. John's pulse raced as Michael drew the bow across the A string. The first note quivered, shaky and unsure. It sounded rough, but it was Michael's own note. He gasped softly at the noise. Tara nodded her head in encouragement. "Good," she whispered. "Again." Michael's face lit up at her praise. He tried again. This time the bow found the string more cleanly. The note rang smoother, steadier. A few heads turned in the cafe, and quiet smiles spread across people's faces. It felt like the room paused to listen, hanging on the small miracle of sound coming from the boy's hands. Michael opened his eyes and looked at Tara. She gave him a thumbs up. His lips curved into a shy smile. Tara hummed the melody under her breath. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." She counted softly for Michael. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then she let him play the first line on his own. Michael drew the bow across the strings, and the notes tumbled out. They were not perfect. They skipped and quivered, but they carried hope. John held his breath. Michael's blue eyes shone with pride. He kept playing, and the melody took shape, line by line. With each pass through the song, Michael's confidence grew. He pressed the strings more firmly, guiding the bow straight. Along each string, the rough sounds straightened into clear tones. Patrons watched with warm applause after each line. A wave of gentle cheering filled the cafe. Michael's cheeks flushed with joy. He stood up in his chair and gave Tara a big grin. John clapped loudly and stood too, wiping tears from his eyes. His chest felt light and open, as if a weight had lifted from him. When Michael finished the tune, Tara set down her violin and hugged him gently. "You played beautifully," she said. Michael hopped down and skipped to her side, his small arms wrapping around her waist. John stepped forward to join the hug. The three of them stood close in the middle of the cafe, sharing the warmth of that moment. A hush fell across the room, then applause broke out again, louder and heartier this time. People cheered, clapped, and offered smiles of pride to Michael. At that moment, the music teacher who had offered lessons earlier stood again. She stepped forward through the tables and approached John. "I'd like to formalize my offer," she said, holding out her card. "Michael has real talent. I want to teach him every week until he is ready for the Harmony Academy scholarship audition." John took the card with shaking fingers. He looked at Tara, then back at the teacher. "Thank you," he said with a catch in his voice. "This means more than I can say." The teacher smiled kindly. "I'm happy to help. Music has power to heal and to reach places words cannot. Michael showed me his heart today." She placed the card on their table. John nodded and folded it carefully. Michael watched the exchange, clutching Tara's hand. Tara squeezed his fingers and gave him a proud smile. "You are brave," she said softly. "You have shown the world what you can do." Tara collected her violin and case to John and held out her hand. John took it and raised it to his eyes, as if it were a treasure. "Thank you, Tara," he said. "You have given my son a gift I could never buy." Tara's eyes shone. She blushed slightly and said, "I'm glad. Music belongs to everyone." Today, Michael found his own voice. John reached into his pocket and took out an envelope. He handed it to Tara. She opened it to find a generous gift bonus far above any tip. Her eyes widened in surprise.
"Hell,
"Don't have to," she said softly. John shook his head. "You earned every cent," he replied, "and more." He tapped his chest. "You gave my son the courage to speak in music." Tara placed the envelope inside her apron and said thank you again. Michael leaned against his father, his small body full of warmth and energy. John wrapped an arm around him. He felt more connected to Michael in that moment than ever before. He knew that this morning would be the first of many steps on Michael's musical journey. He smiled down at his son. "We'll see you soon, right?" She nodded and waved as she walked away. As John and Michael prepared to leave, the teacher slipped a brochure onto the table. It read Harmony Music Academy, weekly violin lessons for young stars. John picked it up and read the details. He folded it and put it in his wallet. Michael held his violin case in his small hands, careful as if it were a bird's nest. John took Michael's hand and led him to the door. Outside, the morning sun felt bright and hopeful. Michael skipped beside his father, the violin case swinging at his side. John looked at the busy street, the trees lining the sidewalk, and felt a surge of gratitude. He bent down and kissed Michael on the forehead. "You were amazing today," he said. Michael beamed and hugged his father's leg. John lifted Michael into his arms and whispered, "Let's go home and practice, buddy." Michael nodded eagerly. His blue eyes sparkled with dreams of notes and melodies. John carried him to the car, careful with the violin case. As they drove away, John held the brochure and the teacher's card. He promised himself he would give Michael every chance to learn, to grow, to shine. On the drive home, Michael fell asleep against John's shoulder, clutching the violin case. John watched his son's peaceful face and thought of all the lessons to come. He remembered how music had reached Michael where no words could. The cafe, the people, Tara's kindness, they had opened a new world for his son. John glanced at Michael and whispered, "Thank you, music." He smiled and turned back to the road, ready for the journey ahead. The sunrise spilled golden light across the dashboard, as if the world itself celebrated Michael's triumph. And John knew, deep in his heart, that today was just the beginning. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as John Harrington poured 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He set one in front of Michael, who sat at the small table by the window, cradling his newly polished violin. Michael's eyes shone with excitement. He lifted the mug, breathed in the sweet steam, and took a careful sip. John smiled as he watched his son's face light up. Just a week had passed since that magical day in the cafe, and already Michael moved with a new sense of purpose. "Ready for your first lesson?" John asked softly. Michael nodded, his small hands tightening around the violin case handle. He hopped down from his seat and followed his father to the front door. The case swung gently at his side. John opened the door and they stepped in too. The warm morning, birds sang in the trees, their song a gentle welcome. Michael paused to watch a bright red robin flit from branch to branch. John knelt beside him. "Remember," he said, "this is just the start of your journey. Have fun." Michael smiled and ran down the front steps. John followed, carrying his briefcase and a small backpack with sheet music. As they drove toward the Harmony Music Academy, Michael hummed a little tune under his breath. John felt a wave of pride and relief. He had worried that the moment in the cafe might be a one-time spark, but Michael's eagerness proved the magic had taken root. At the academy, a friendly receptionist greeted them. The walls were lined with photos of students playing instruments. Gentle piano piece drifted through the hall. John signed some forms while Michael's teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, appeared with a warm smile. She was tall and kind, with silver hair and bright eyes. She knelt to meet Michael's gaze. "Good morning, Michael," she said. "I am so glad you're here." Michael gripped his violin case and lifted it slightly. Mrs. Alvarez led him to a practice room down a quiet hallway. John watched through the window as Mrs. Alvarez opened the case and helped Michael hold the violin under his chin. She showed him how to stand, with feet shoulder-width apart. Michael listened carefully, his forehead creased in focus. John took a seat outside the glass door. He opened his phone and saw notifications, messages from friends, emails from colleagues. But none of that mattered now. His heart felt light.
8.
He tapped his fingers on the armrest and remembered how anxious he once felt bringing Michael into new places. Now, his son faced this lesson with calm joy. Inside the room, Mrs. Alvarez counted softly, 1, 2, 3, and guided Michael's bow. The first note rang with a gentle wobble. Michael's small body straightened. He drew another bow, and the tone became stronger. Mrs. Alvarez nodded and clapped. "Wonderful, Michael," she said. "Let's learn your piece." Michael's piece was simpler, short melody he already knew. He repeated each phrase, following Mrs. Alvarez's patient guidance. 20 minutes later, the lesson ended. Mrs. Alvarez hugged Michael and praised his focus. Michael beamed and waved goodbye. John opened the door and greeted them both, thanked Mrs. Alvarez and paid for future lessons, but the cost was already covered by the scholarship fund. The receptionist waved as they left. Back in the car, Michael held the violin in his lap, humming the melody he had played. John glanced at him. "You did great," he said. "I can't wait to hear more." Michael's face lit up. He practiced. A few notes as they drove away, each one clearer than the last. John felt tears prick his eyes. He rested his hand on Michael's shoulder. "Music suits you," he whispered. That afternoon, John sat at his home office desk and drafted an email. "To Tara," he began. "Dear Tara, I wanted to share how Michael's lessons are going. ... He described the lesson, Michael's shy first note that became steady, and how the scholarship fund you inspired is making this possible. He ended with, "Thank you for the kindness you showed us. You have changed our lives." He clicked send. Across town, Tara checked her phone and saw John's email. She opened it with a smile. She read how Michael practiced and how he looked forward to each lesson. She saw that the fund in her name had covered the cost of a full term. Her heart warmed. She forwarded the message to her own teacher and then to her sister, adding, "I never imagined my small act would grow into this." She typed a quick reply to John. "I am so happy for Michael. Thank you for letting me be part of his journey." That evening, John settled onto the sofa with Michael. The boy placed his violin on his lap and drew the bow. He played the melody he had learned, not perfectly, but with clear joy. John wrapped an arm around him. He set aside his work and closed his eyes, listening. The tune rose and fell like waves. On a calm sea, he felt peace he had not known in years. Their neighbor, Mrs. Singh, walked by and heard the music. She peeked in through the open window and clapped softly. "Beautiful," she said. Michael paused and grinned. John waved. Mrs. Singh stayed a moment, smiling, then went back to her house. John realized that Michael's music was touching everyone around him. It drew people together. A few days later, John posted a short message on social media, a picture of Michael holding his violin in the cafe, with Tara smiling beside him. He wrote, "Never underestimate a simple act of kindness. This black waitress shared her violin and brought music into my autistic son's life. Now he is learning to play. Gratitude to Tara and Mrs. Alvarez at Harmony Academy." Within hours, the post had hundreds of likes and shares. Comments poured in. "This made my day. Your son is wonderful. Tara is amazing." Tara saw the post and blushed. She read the comments and felt proud. Her simple choice to share her music had touched thousands. She replied under her name, "Happy to see Michael's joy. Music belongs to us all." Some people recognized the cafe and left messages for the owner. Soon, the cafe posted a thank you note to Tara on their own page. The local news station caught wind of the story and ran a short segment about the power of human kindness. John watched it with Michael, who sat on his lap, fingers curled around the bow. That night, John tucked Michael into bed. He kissed his son's forehead and whispered, "I love you, my musician." Michael smiled sleepily, clutching his favorite violin sticker to his chest. "Love you, Dad," he mumbled. John switched off the light and closed the door. In his own room, John sat at his desk and opened a journal. He wrote, "July 17th, 2025 today, Michael played his first piece in a lesson. I saw him shine. I felt the world shift. Music gave him a voice." Paused, pen in hand, and thought of Tara, of Mrs. Alvarez, of every gentle soul who had helped. He wrote, "May I always remember that kindness matters more than money." Next morning, John walked outside onto his balcony before dawn. He held a mug of coffee and watched the sky turn pink. He listened for the distant hum of early traffic, for birds beginning their day. He felt his heart light with hope. He thought of all the lessons to come, of melodies waiting to be discovered. He whispered to the rising sun, "Thank you for this gift." Back inside, Michael stretched and yawned, ready for another day. He oversaw his violin on the hallway table and ran a finger across its smooth wood. His face shone. John found him there and knelt down. "Ready for breakfast?" he asked. Michael nodded and carried the violin with him to the kitchen. John laughed and opened the fridge as they ate. Michael hummed the song he practiced. John joined in, tapping the table in time. Their simple duet filled the room. Outside, the world continued. Cars passed, birds sang, people moved. But for John and Michael, time had shifted. They carried music in their hearts. A letter arrived in the mail a week later, an invitation to a small recital at the cafe. Organized by the owner to honor Tara's kindness, John read it aloud to Michael. "Please join us on July 25th for an evening of music with special guest, Michael Harrington." Michael's eyes grew wide with delight. John hugged him tightly. "We will be there," he promised. The recital night came. The cafe had set up chairs and candles. Patrons, neighbors, and the local news station gathered. Tara stood by the stage, smiling and nervous. When Michael's turn came, John lifted him onto the little stage. Michael stood tall, violin under his chin. Mrs. Alvarez accompanied him on the piano. Michael drew his bow and began the melody he had learned. His first note was steady. The second was true. The crowd held its breath. By the final note, applause filled the room. Michael's face glowed. Tara and Mrs. Alvarez stood to cheer. John watched tears of joy roll down his cheeks. His son had found a voice that transcended words. In that moment, John realized that this was not just Michael's gift. It was a gift everyone shared, from a black waitress's simple act to a father's unwavering love to a teacher's patient guidance. They had all played a part in this harmony. As the lights dimmed and candles flickered, John held Michael close. He whispered, "This is just the beginning." Michael looked up and smiled. John knew they would carry this harmony forward together into every tomorrow.